Octavia Butler called Bloodchild her pregnant man story, and I think by the time we get to the end of this story, you're going to understand why. This is one of the few short stories that she wrote, and it's a work of speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is a broad genre of fiction that encompasses stories that are different from the strict realism that's often explored. It goes beyond that. Speculative fiction stories ask what if, and then present these imagined worlds based on that question. What if something were true? Speculative fiction includes genres like science fiction, fantasy, horror, magical realism, and many more genres. I'm going to read through this story from beginning to end, and I'll explain some of the more complicated vocabulary. If you're not interested in a short overview of some of the basic elements of this story, go ahead and skip ahead to the time signature that's here, that's posted. Before we dive into this story, because it can be a little bit confusing, I'm going to give you some basic information about the story, like I'm going to explain who some of the characters are and explain the setting of the story. At the end of the video, I'll analyze the story from several different perspectives. We'll look at some of the sci-fi elements in the story. We'll look at the story from a gender or feminist perspective, from an ecocritical perspective, that is looking at the way that humans and animals and natural resources are managed in the story. We'll look at the story from an afropessimist perspective, which is probably going to be a new perspective for some people, but I think it's a really interesting perspective. And we'll look at the story from a post-colonial perspective. We'll also look at the story from a humanist or speciesist perspective. That is, the ways that humans interact with other species or alien species, which it's kind of interesting, especially given what's happening in the world right now. Let's start with the characters. There are only a handful of characters in this story. There's Gan, who's a boy who's described as a boy who's coming of age in the story. There's Tigatoy, who is a Tillik admin of a reserve. The Tillik are an alien species. There's Lien, who's Gan's mom. She's human. There's Gan's sisters, who are Xuan Hoa, who's his older sister, and then his younger sister is never named in the story, but there is a reference to him having a younger sister. There's also Ki, who's Gan's older brother, and there's Bram Lomith, there's Tigatkif Te, and then there's also a general category of people called the Tillik. Now, the story takes place on an alien planet. It's never really named in the story. It's just clear that it's an alien planet that humans either migrated to, emigrated to, or for some reason they left Earth in order to go to this alien planet. And it's also not clear if all humans left or just a small group of humans left. Now, the humans on that planet are in a reserve. And through the story, there's these references to the reserve and to the conditions in the reserve. So I won't spoil it for you, but that gives you an idea of the characters and the setting of this story. So let's go ahead and get started. My last night of childhood began with a visit home. Tigatoy's sister had given us 2 sterile eggs. Tigatoy gave one to my mother, brother, and sisters. She insisted that I eat the other one alone. It didn't matter. There was still enough to leave everyone feeling good. Almost everyone. My mother wouldn't take any. She sat watching everyone drifting and dreaming without her. Most of the time, she watched me. I lay against Tigatoy's long velvet underside, sipping from my egg now and then, wondering why my mother denied herself such a harmless pleasure. Less of her hair would be gray if she indulged now and then. So to indulge means you take advantage of something to enjoy it. Like often it's something that's extravagant or decadent. You indulge in eating chocolate, or you indulge in doing something that is not just the basics of what you need to stay alive, but it's going beyond that. Like it's usually something that's rich, something that's excessive, that's unnecessary, but that you really enjoy. So here, if she indulged now and then. That hints that maybe there's some healing properties to the eggs. The eggs prolonged life, prolonged vigor. Okay, so prolonged means continuing for a long time or longer than usual, to extend. And vigor is physical strength or good health. So the eggs made people live longer than usual and gave them physical strength and good health. My father, who had never refused one in his life, had lived more than twice as long as he should have. And towards the end of his life, when he should have been slowing down, he married my mother and fathered 4 children. But my mother seemed content to age before she had to. I saw her turn away as several of Tigatoy's limbs secured me closer. Tigatoy liked our body heat and took advantage of it whenever she could. When I was little and at home more, my mother used to try to tell me how to behave with Tigatoy, how to be respectful and always obedient, because Tigatoy was the Tillit government official in charge of the preserve. So obedient means to listen and to not talk back, to do what someone says. And thus the most important of her kind to deal directly with the Terrans. It was an honor, my mother said, that such a person had chosen to come into the family. My mother was at her most formal and severe when she was lying. So here, Terrans, throughout the story, you'll see that instead of being called humans, humans on this planet are called Terrans. That's a reference to the Terran system, which is Earth and the Sol system. If you know anything about astronomy, I think that's what our solar system is called, Sol. I had no idea why she was lying, or even what she was lying about. It was an honor to have Tigatoy in the family, but it was hardly a novelty. So novelty means something that's special or unique. A novelty is something that there's maybe very few of. It could be rare. So in this situation, in this context, it could mean rare, but novelty could also be referring to, you also often hear it in reference to maybe a little something that someone brings back from vacation. They'll say, oh, it's a novelty, right? It's something that's unique and different. Tigatoy and my mother had been friends all my mother's life, and Tigatoy was not interested in being honored in the house she considered her second home. She simply came in, climbed onto one of her special couches, and called me over to keep her warm. It was impossible to be formal with her while lying against her and hearing her complain as usual that I was too skinny. You're better, she said this time, probing me with 6 or 7 of her limbs. You're gaining weight finally. Thinness is dangerous. The probing changed subtly, became a series of caresses. He's still too thin, my mother said sharply. Tigatoy lifted her head and perhaps a meter of her body off the couch as though she were sitting up. She looked at my mother, and my mother, her face lined and old-looking, turned away. Leon, I would like you to have what's left of Gan's egg. The eggs are for the children, my mother said. They are for the family. Please take it. Unwillingly obedient, my mother took it from me and put it in her mouth. So unwillingly means she isn't willing. So it's the opposite of willing, but it's an adjective here. So obedient is the main adjective. And then unwillingly, the ly makes it an adverb. So it's describing obedient. So unwillingly means she's not doing it because she wants to. And then obedient means she's listening. She's doing exactly what Tigatoy has asked her to do, but she's doesn't really want to. Unwillingly obedient, my mother took it from me and put it in her mouth. There were only a few drops left in the now shrunken elastic shell, but she squeezed them out, swallowed them, and after a few moments, some of the lines of tension began to smooth from her face. It's good, she whispered. Sometimes I forget how good it is. You should take more, Tigatoy said. Why are you such a hurry to be old? My mother said nothing. I like being able to come here, Tigatoy said. This place is a refuge because of you, yet you won't take care of yourself. Tigatoy was hounded on the outside. Her people wanted more of us made available. Only she and her political faction stood between us and the hordes who did not understand why there was a preserve, why any Terran could not be courted, paid, drafted, in some way made available to them. So hounded means bothered someone repeatedly over and over and over, asking someone for something or seeking something from someone. So Tigatoy was hounded on the outside. So outside, I think they mean outside of the preserve. Her people wanted more of us made available. Only she and her political faction stood between us and the hordes. So a horde is a big group of people, but there's also a negative connotation to that word horde. There are two definitions of horde. One of them is not really relevant in this situation. It could mean a collection of valuable things, a hidden collection. Like you can say, oh, that person hoards gold and they have this hoard of gold. But that would be a positive thing. In this context, in the context of this story, horde is negative. It means a large group or crowd, especially one that is unruly or migratory, which means a large group of crowd that makes a lot of noise. They're boisterous. They're maybe moving from one place to another and making a mess as they're moving. They're very loud. It's often used to describe movements of groups of people or animals. But again, there's a negative connotation to the word horde. The word courted is often used in terms of marriage and proposals. And it's a somewhat antiquated word. In English, we used to use it before when society was much more formal and there were more formal separations between males and females. So a male would court a female, and then a male would get permission from a female's family in order to marry her. Now, courted here also refers to the way that a company, or specifically here, the Tillich, want to court humans. That is, kind of get to know a human, offer them things, give them something of value in exchange for something. A company can court an employee, like they may want to recruit an employee to get an employee to come and work for them. So they take them out to lunch or dinner, they give them things, they give them perks. That's what it means to be courted. So this horde doesn't understand why any Terran can't be courted, paid, and drafted. Drafted is a more specific, formal way of courting, but drafted is almost always used in the context of the military. You draft. So here in the US, there's a military draft, a selective service. So young men, I believe young men is when they turn 18, have to sign up for selective service. I don't think that they do it anymore. In the last few years, they've stopped doing it, but there is such a thing as military draft. And in some countries, like in Israel, in Switzerland, there's a mandatory military draft, or a time that young men have to spend in the military to train. They don't understand why any Terran could not be courted, paid, drafted, in some way made available to them. Or they did understand, but in their desperation, they did not care. She parceled us out to the desperate and sold us to the rich and powerful for their political support. So to parcel something out means that you separate it into individual parts, and then you give it out in chunks. Like you might parcel out, if you're a teacher in a class, you might have a bunch of chocolate or a gift or something, and you separate it into equal portions, and then you give it out, you parcel it out to the students. So she, Tigatoy, parceled out humans to the desperate and sold us to the rich and powerful for their political support. So right there, she's managing humans as, you can think of it as a natural resource or as chattel. Chattel is something, usually animals, that you own. Thus, we were necessities, status symbols, and an independent people. And that's where the first question for me comes in, is if you're being parceled out and sold, can you really be an independent people? I wonder. Maybe this is a hint at Gan's limited perspective. She oversaw the joining of families, putting an end to the final remnants of the earlier system of breaking up Terran families to suit impatient Tillich. I had lived outside with her. I had seen the desperate eagerness in the way some people looked at me. It was a little frightening to know that only she stood between us and that desperation that could so easily swallow us. My mother would look at her sometimes and say to me, "Take care of her." And I would remember that she had too been outside and seen. Now Tigatoy used 4 of her limbs to push me away from her onto the floor. "Go on, Gan," she said. "Sit down there with your sisters and enjoy not being sober. You had most of the egg. Lien, come warm me." Nothing can buy him from me. Sober, she would not have permitted herself to refer to such things. "Nothing," Tigatoy agreed, humoring her. So to humor her means that when you're humoring someone, you're saying whatever you need in order to kind of placate them, in order to make them relaxed, in order to make them not as worried. "Did you think I would sell him for eggs, for long life, my son?" "Not for anything," Tigatoy said, stroking my mother's shoulders, toying with her long graying hair. I would like to have touched my mother, shared that moment with her. She would take my hand if I touched her now, freed by the egg and the sting. She would smile, perhaps say things long held in. But tomorrow she would remember all this as a humiliation. I did not want to be part of a remembered humiliation. Best just be still and know she loved me under all the duty and pride and pain. My older sister obeyed, swaying drunkenly as she stood up. When she had finished, she sat down beside me and took my hand. We had always been a unit, she and I. My mother put the back of her head against Tigatoy's underside and tried from that impossible angle to look up into the broad, round face. "You're going to sting me again?" "Yes, Lien." "I'll sleep until tomorrow noon." "Good, you need it. When did you last sleep?" My mother made a wordless sound of annoyance. "I should have stepped on you when you were small enough," she muttered. It was an old joke between them. They had grown up together, sort of, though Tigatoy had not, in my mother's lifetime, been small enough for any Terran to step on. She was nearly 3 times my mother's present age, yet would still be young when my mother died of age. But Tigatoy and my mother had met as Tigatoy was coming into a period of rapid development, a kind of Tillich adolescence. My mother was only a child, but for a while they developed at the same rate and had no better friends than each other. Tigatoy had even introduced my mother to the man who became my father. My parents, pleased with each other in spite of their different ages, married as Tigatoy was going into her family's business, politics. She and my mother saw each other less. But sometime before my older sister was born, my mother promised Tigatoy one of her children. She would have to give one of us to someone, and she preferred Tigatoy to some stranger. Years passed. Tigatoy traveled and increased her influence. The preserve was hers by the time she came back to my mother to collect what she probably saw as her just reward for her hard work. My older sister took an instant liking to her and wanted to be chosen. But my mother was just coming to term with me, and Tigatoy liked the idea of choosing an infant and watching and taking part in all the phases of development. I'm told I was first caged within Tigatoy's many limbs only 3 minutes after my birth. A few days later, I was given my first taste of egg. I tell Terrans that when they ask whether I was afraid of her, and I tell it to Tillich when Tigatoy suggests a young Terran child for them, and they, anxious and ignorant, demand an adolescent. Anxious means that they're feeling a little worried and nervous. And ignorant means that they don't know, they just don't understand the process. So to be ignorant means you don't know. Even my brother, who had somehow grown up to fear and distrust the Tillich, could probably have gone smoothly into one of their families if he had been adopted early enough. Sometimes I think for his sake he should have been. I look at him stretched out on the floor across the room, his eyes open but glazed as he dreamed his egg dream. No matter what he felt towards the Tillich, he always demanded his share of egg. "Lien, can you stand up?" Tigatoy asked suddenly. "Stand?" my mother said. "I thought I was going to sleep." Later, something sounds wrong outside. The cage was abruptly gone. "What?" Up, Lien. My mother recognized her tone and got up in time to avoid being dumped on the floor. Tigatoy whipped her 3 meters of body off her couch towards the door and out at full speed. 3 meters is about 9 feet and 10.5 inches, so more or less 9 feet and about 11 inches. She had bones, ribs, a long spine, a skull, 4 sets of limb bones per segment. But when she moved that way, twisting, hurling herself into controlled falls, landing, running, she seemed not only boneless, but aquatic. Something swimming through the air as though it were water. I loved watching her move. So aquatic, it's an adjective that literally just means of the water. So you can say aquatic animals. Those are animals that are in the water or that swim in the water, that live in the water. I left my sister and started to follow her out the door. Though I wasn't very steady on my own feet, it would have been better to sit and dream, better yet to find a girl and share a waking dream with her. Back when the Tillich saw us as not much more than convenient, big, warm-blooded animals, they would pin several of us together, male and female, and feed us only eggs. That way they could be sure of getting another generation of us, no matter how we tried to hold out. We were lucky that didn't go on long. A few generations of that, and we would have been little more than convenient big animals. Hold the door open, Gan, Tigatoy said, and tell the family to stay back. What is it? I asked. Tillich. I shrank back against the door. Here? Alone? He was trying to reach a call box, I suppose. She carried the man past me, unconscious, folded like a coat over some of her limbs. So unconscious means he's not awake. He looked young, my brother's age perhaps, and he was thinner than he should have been, what Tigatoy would have called dangerously thin. Gan, go to the call box, she said. She put the man on the floor and began stripping off his clothes. I did not move. After a moment, she looked up at me, her sudden stillness a sign of deep impatience. Send Key, I told her. I'll stay here. Maybe I can help. She let her limbs begin to move again, lifting the man, pulling his shirt over his head. You don't want to see this, she said. It'll be hard. I can't help this man the way his Tillich could. I know, but send Key. He won't want to be of any help here. I'm at least willing to try. She looked at my brother, older, bigger, stronger, certainly more able to help her. He was sitting up now, braced against a wall, staring at the man on the floor with undisguised fear and revulsion. So undisguised, the UN means opposite. So you have disguised, which means hidden. So hidden fear, but here it's undisguised, which means he's not even trying to hide his fear. And revulsion means that he doesn't want anything to do with this. He thinks it's disgusting, possibly. So that's what revulsion means. Like, I find fava beans revolting. That's what revulsion means. Even she could see that he would be useless. Key, go, she said. He didn't argue. He stood up, swayed briefly, then steadied, frightened, sober. This man's name is Bram Lomas, she told him, reading from the man's armband. I fingered my own armband in sympathy. He needs Tigotifte. Do you hear? Bram Lomas, Tigotifte, my brother said. I'm going. He edged around Lomas and ran out the door. Lomas began to regain consciousness. He only moaned at first and clutched spasmodically at the pair of Tigatoy's limbs. So spasmodically, the ly at the end makes it an adverb. It's describing the way that he clutched. So to clutch means you hold on to or you grab, like you can clutch your purse. Often people say, oh, she clutched her pearls, which means she grabbed her pearls either in shock or to protect her pearls, right? So she clutched spasmodically. So spasm. To spasm is like where your muscles contract, often without you trying to make them contract. So to have a spasmodically. He moaned at first and clutched spasmodically at a pair of Tigatoy's limbs. My younger sister, finally awake from her egg dream, came close to look at him until my mother pulled her back. Tigatoy removed the man's shoes, then his pants, all the while leaving him 2 of her limbs to grip. Except for the final few, all her limbs were equally dexterous. So equal means that they are the same, and dexterous is a synonym for skilled. So all of her limbs are equally dexterous means that all of her limbs are able to move in a very skilled way. That means that they can move in an accurate way. They have a wide range of motion, perhaps. And all of those limbs on her, except for the final few, are pretty movable. And she can use them with precision and skill. Except for the final few, all her limbs were equally dexterous. "I want no argument from you this time, Gan," she said. I straightened. "What shall I do?" "Go out and slaughter an animal that is at least half your size." "Slaughter? But I've never..." She knocked me across the room. Her tail was an efficient weapon, whether she exposed the sting or not. I got up, feeling stupid for having ignored her warning, and went into the kitchen. Maybe I could kill something with a knife or an axe. My mother raised a few Terran animals for the table and several thousand local ones for their fur. Tigatoy would probably prefer something local. An octi, perhaps. Some of those were the right size, though they had 3 times as many teeth as I did, and a real love of using them. My mother, Hoa, and Ki could kill them with knives. I had never killed one at all, had never slaughtered any animal. I'd spent most of my time with Tigatoy while my brother and sisters were learning the family business. Tigatoy had been right. I should have been the one to go to the call box. At least I could do that. I went back to the corner cabinet where my mother kept her large house and larger tools. At the back of the cabinet, there was a pipe that carried off wastewater from the kitchen, except that it didn't anymore. My father had rerouted the wastewater before I was born. Now the pipe could be turned so that one half slid around the other and a rifle could be stored inside. This wasn't our only gun, but it was our most easily accessible one. I would have used it to shoot one of the biggest of the octi. Then Tigatoy would probably confiscate it. So to confiscate means to take away. Firearms were illegal in the preserve. There had been incidents right after the preserve was established. Terrans shooting Tillik, shooting Ntillik. This was before the joining of families began, before everyone had a personal stake in keeping the peace. No one had shot a Tillik in my lifetime or my mother's, but the law still stood. For our protection, we were told. There were stories of whole Terran families wiped out in reprisal back during the assassinations. So reprisal means retribution in this context, or punishment. So someone is wiped out as a way of punishing the Terrans for using the weapons. I went out to the cages and shot the biggest octi I could find. It was a handsome breeding male, and my mother would not be pleased to see me bringing it in, but it was the right size, and I was in a hurry. I put the octi's long, warm body over my shoulder, glad that some of the weight I'd gained was muscle, and took it to the kitchen. There, I put the gun back in its hiding place. If Tigatoy noticed the octi's wounds and demanded the gun, I would give it to her. Otherwise, I let it stay where my father wanted it. I turned to take the octi to her, then hesitated. For several seconds, I stood in front of the closed door, wondering why I was suddenly afraid. I knew what was going to happen. I hadn't seen it before, but Tigatoy had shown me diagrams and drawings. She had made sure I knew the truth as soon as I was old enough to understand it. Yet I did not want to go into that room. I wasted a little time choosing a knife from the carved wooden box in which my mother kept them. Tigatoy might want one, I told myself, for the tough, heavily furred hide of the octi. Gan, Tigatoy called, her voice harsh with urgency. I swallowed. I had not imagined a single moving of the feet could be so difficult. I realized I was trembling, and that shamed me. Shame impelled me through the door. So impel means to drive or to urge forward, to cause someone to feel a strong need or desire to do something. I put the octi down near Tigatoy and saw that Lomas was unconscious again. She, Lomas, and I were alone in the room. My mother and sisters probably sent out so they would not have to watch. I envied them. So envy means that you wish you had something someone else has. But my mother came back into the room as Tigatoy seized the Octi. Ignoring the knife I offered her, she extended claws from several of her limbs and slit the Octi from throat to anus. She looked at me, her yellow eyes intact. "Hold this man's shoulder, Gan." I stared at Lomas in panic, realizing that I did not want to touch him, let alone hold him. This would not be like shooting an animal, not as quick, not as merciful, and, I hoped, not as final, but there was nothing I wanted less than to be part of it. My mother came forward. "Gan, you hold his right side," she said. "I'll hold his left." And if he came to, he would throw her off without realizing he had done it. She was a tiny woman. She often wondered aloud how she had produced, as she said, such huge children. "Never mind," I told her, taking the man's shoulder. "I'll do it." She hovered nearby. "Don't worry," I said. "I won't shame you. You don't have to stay and watch." She looked at me uncertainly, then touched my face in a rare caress. Finally, she went back to her bedroom. Tigatoy lowered her head in relief. "Thank you, Gan," she said, with courtesy more Terran than Tillich. "That one... she's always finding new ways for me to make her suffer." Lomas began to groan and make choked sounds. I'd hoped he would stay unconscious. Tigatoy put her face near his so that he focused on her. "I've stung you as much as I dare for now," she told him. "When this is over, I'll sting you to sleep and you won't hurt anymore." "Please," the man begged. "Wait." "There's no more time, Bram. I'll sting you as soon as it's over. When Tigatoy arrives, she'll give you eggs to help you heal. It will be soon over." "Tigatoy," the man shouted, straining against my hands. "Soon, Bram." Tigatoy glanced at me, then placed a claw against his abdomen slightly to the right of the middle, just below the left rib. There was movement on the right side, tiny, seemingly random pulsations moving his brown flesh, creating a concavity here, a convexity there, over and until I could see the rhythm of it and knew where the next pulse would be. So pulsing is what your pulse does. So your heart, when your heart pumps blood, it's pulsing, doo-doo, 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 right? So when you're taking someone's pulse by putting your finger over one of their veins in their hand or over a vein in their neck, and you can feel your heart beating, that's the origin of that word pulsation, or that's the meaning of that word pulsation. So the pulse. So here, concavity and convexity are two terms that you'll most likely come across in a math class. So if you're looking at a graph, then sometimes they'll talk about concave lines or convex lines. And you can think of the same thing as like a person's body, like here, Bram's body. Concavity and convexity means there's some places where the movement underneath the skin is making it higher and some places where it's making it lower. So it's going high and low, that pulsation of something moving underneath his skin. Lomas's entire body stiffened under Tigatoy's claw, though she merely rested it against him as she wound the rear section of her body around his legs. He might break my grip, but he would not break hers. He wept helplessly as she used his pants to tie his hands, then pushed his hands above his head so that I could kneel on the cloth between him and pin them in place. She rolled up his shirt and gave it to him to bite down on, and she opened him. His body convulsed with the first cut. So to convulse means that he tensed up because it was painful. He almost tore himself away from me. The sound he made, I'd never heard such sounds come from anything human. Tigatoy seemed to pay no attention as she lengthened and deepened the cut, now and then pausing to lick away blood. His blood vessels contracted, reacting to the chemistry of her saliva, and the bleeding slowed. I felt as though I were helping her torture him, helping her consume him. I knew I would vomit soon, but I didn't know why I hadn't already. I couldn't possibly last until she was finished. She found the first grub. It was fat and deep red with his blood, both inside and out. It had already eaten its own egg case, but apparently had not yet begun to eat its host. At this stage, it would eat any flesh except its mother's. Let alone, it would have gone on excreting the poisons that had both sickened and alerted Lomas. So to excrete means to release. Excrete, that word is most often used in the context of biology. So living creatures excrete something. Sometimes you'll hear the term, oh, this animal, like let's say a skunk, excretes this kind of scented discharge, this scented thing that makes it smell. It's excretion. Eventually, it would have begun to eat. By the time it ate its way out of Lomas's flesh, Lomas would be dead or dying and unable to take revenge on the thing that was killing him. There was always a grace period between the time the host sickened and the time the grubs began to eat him. Tigatoy picked up the writhing grub carefully, looked at it, somehow ignoring the terrible groans of the man. Abruptly, the man lost consciousness, so he fell asleep. Good, Tigatoy looked down at him. I wish you Terrans could do that at will. She felt nothing, and the thing she held. It was limbless and boneless at this stage, perhaps 15 centimeters long and too thick, blind and slimy with blood. So 15 centimeters is about 6 inches, and 2 centimeters, oh, that would make it really, really thin. So it more or less looks like a worm. It was like a large worm. Tigatoy put it into the belly of the Octi, and it began at once to burrow. It would stay there and eat as long as there was anything to eat. Probing through Lomas's flesh, she found 2 more, one of them smaller and more vigorous. A male, she said happily. He would be dead before I would. He would be through his metamorphosis and screwing everything that would hold still before his sisters even had limbs. So metamorphosis is a biological term. It means a transition. And usually it's a transition from one state to another. Like, for example, a caterpillar. That's the most common ways that metamorphosis is used, is to describe insects. When they change from being the little caterpillar into being a butterfly, that's a metamorphosis. And they go into, like, the caterpillar creates a cocoon and transforms in that cocoon into a butterfly. So they change from being like a worm into being a flying insect. Moth do the same thing. So here, this Tillich is also going to go through a metamorphosis. He was the only one to make a serious effort to bite Tigatoy as she placed him in the Octi. Paler worms oozed to visibility in Lomas's flesh. I closed my eyes. It was worse than finding something dead, rotting, and filled with tiny animal grubs, and it was far worse than any drawing or diagram. Ah, there are more, Tigatoy said, plucking out 2 long, thick grubs. You may have to kill another animal, Gan. Everything lives inside you Terrans. I had been told all my life that this was a good and necessary thing Tillich and Terran did together, a kind of birth. I had believed it until now. I knew birth was painful and bloody no matter what, but this was something else, something worse. I wasn't ready to see it. Maybe I never would be, yet I couldn't not see it. Closing my eyes didn't help. Tigatoy found a grub still eating its egg case. The remains of the case were still wired into the blood vessel by their own little tube or hook or whatever. That was the way the grubs were anchored and the way they fed. They took only blood until they were ready to emerge. Then they ate their stretched elastic egg cases. Then they ate their hosts. So to emerge means to come out. And based on what you've read in the story to this point, their process of coming out involves eating the human that they're inside. Tigatoy bit away the egg case, licked away the blood. Did she like the taste? Did childhood habits die hard or not die at all? The whole procedure was wrong, alien. I wouldn't have thought anything about her could seem alien to me. One more, I think, she said. Perhaps 2, a good family. In a host animal these days, we would be happy to find 1 or 2 alive. She glanced at me. Go outside, Gan, and empty your stomach. Go now while the man is unconscious. I staggered out, barely made it. Beneath the tree just beyond the front door, I vomited until there was nothing left to bring up. Finally, I stood shaking, tears streaming down my face. I did not know why I was crying, but I could not stop. I went further from the house to avoid being seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw red worms crawling all over redder human flesh. there was a car coming towards the house. Since Terrans were forbidden motorized vehicles except for certain farm equipment, I knew this must be Lomax Tillich with Key and perhaps a Terran doctor. I wiped my face on my shirt, struggled for control. "Gan," Key called as the car stopped. "What happened?" He crawled out of the low, round, Tillich convenient door. Another Terran crawled out the other side and went into the house without speaking to me. The doctor. This was his help, and a few eggs. Lomas might make it. "Tigatif te?" I said. The Tillich driver surged out of her car, reared up half her length before me. She was paler and smaller than Tigatoy, probably born from the body of an animal. The Tillich from the Terran bodies were always larger as well as more numerous. Numerous means there were more of them. 6 young, I told her, maybe 7, all alive, at least one male. "Lomas?" she asked. I liked her for the question and the concern in her voice when she asked it. The last coherent thing he said was her name. So coherent means something that you can make sense of. So here it means the last thing that he said that Gan could understand was her name. "He's alive," I said. She surged away to the house without any word. "She's been sick," my brother said, watching her go. When I called, I could hear people telling her she wasn't well enough to go out, even for this. I said nothing. I had extended courtesy to the Tillich. So to extend courtesy means I had gone out of my way to be a good host. Now I didn't want to talk to anyone. I hoped he would go in out of curiosity, if nothing else. "Finally found out more than you wanted to, eh?" I looked at him. "Don't give me one of those looks," he said. "You're not her. You're just her property." One of her looks. Had I picked up even an ability to imitate her expressions? "What'd you do, puke?" He sniffed the air. "So now you know what you're in for." I walked away from him. He and I had been close when we were kids. He would let me follow him around when I was home. And sometimes Tigatoy would let me bring him along when she took me into the city. But something had happened when he reached adolescence. I never knew what. He began keeping out of Tigatoy's way. Then he began running away until he realized there was no away. Not in the preserve, certainly not outside. After that, he concentrated on getting his share of every egg that came into the house and on looking out for me in a way that made me all but hate him, a way that clearly said, as long as I was all right, he was safe from the Tillich. "How was it? Really?" he demanded, following me. "I killed an octi. The young ate it." "You didn't run out of the house and puke because they ate an octi." I had never seen a person cut open before. That was true and enough for him to know. I couldn't talk about the other, not with him. "Oh," he said. He glanced at me as though he wanted to say more, but he kept quiet. We walked, not really headed anywhere, towards the back, towards the cages, towards the field. "Did he say anything?" he asked. "Lomas, I mean. Who else would he mean?" He said, "Tikotgif." Key shuddered. If she had done that to me, she'd be the last person I'd call for. "You'd call for her. Her sting would ease your pain without killing the grubs in you." "You think I'd care if they died?" "No, of course you wouldn't. Would I?" "Shit," he drew a deep breath. "I've seen what they do. You think this thing with Lomas is bad? It was nothing." I didn't argue. He didn't know what he was talking about. "I saw them eat a man," he said. I turned to face him. "You're lying." "I saw them eat a man," he paused. "It was when I was little. I had been to the Hartmund house and I was on my way home. Halfway here, I saw a man and a Tillich, and the man was in Tillich. The ground was hilly. I was able to hide from them and watch. Tillich wouldn't open the man because she had nothing to feed the grubs. The man couldn't go any further and there were no houses around. He was in so much pain, he told her to kill him. He begged her to kill him. Finally, she did. She cut his throat. One swipe of her claw. I saw the grubs eat their way out, then burrow in again, still eating." His words made me see Lomas's flesh again, parasitized, crawling. "Why didn't you tell me that?" I whispered. So parasitized, crawling, that parasitize is like a parasite. It comes from the word parasite, which is kind of what these grubs are. They're something that lives in a host body. So a parasite is a creature, usually a bacteria or a small bug or some kind of small animal that lives inside the body of another animal. He looked startled, as though he'd forgotten I was listening. I don't know. You started to run away not long after that, didn't you? Yeah, stupid. Running inside the preserve. Running in a cage. I shook my head, said what I should have said to him long ago. She wouldn't take you, Key. You don't have to worry. She would if anything happened to you. No. She'd take Xuan Hoa. Hoa wants it. She wouldn't if she had stayed to watch Lomas. They don't take women, he said with contempt. So the contempt means he's feeling that, it usually means a feeling that a person or thing is beneath consideration, that something is worthless. But here I think the contempt could also be bitterness, because he knows that his sisters are safe and that his brother was chosen. And maybe that's why he's putting so much effort into keeping Gan safe, is because he absolutely doesn't want this done to him. But he knows that, just because of who he is, because he's a boy, that he's up if Gan doesn't do it. They do sometimes, I glanced at him. Actually, they prefer women. You should be around them when they talk among themselves. They say women have more body fat to protect the grubs, but they usually take men to leave the women free to bear their own young. To provide a next generation of host animals, he said, switching from contempt to bitterness. It's more than that, I countered. Was it? If it were going to happen to me, I'd want to believe it were more too. It is more. I felt like a kid. Stupid argument. Did you think so while Tigatoy was picking worms out of that guy's guts? It's not supposed to happen that way. Sure it is. You weren't supposed to see it, that's all. And his Tillich was supposed to do it. She could sting him unconscious and the operation wouldn't have been as painful, but she'd still open him, pick out the grubs, and if she missed even one, it would poison him and eat him from the inside out. There was actually a time when my mother told me to show respect for Key because he was my older brother. I walked away hating him. In his way, he was gloating. So to gloat means that you're kind of rubbing it in someone's face, that you have something they don't have or that you've won. He was safe and I wasn't. I could have hit him, but I didn't think I would be able to stand it when he refused to hit me back, when he looked at me with contempt and pity. So pity means he feels bad for him. He wouldn't let me get away. Longer legged, he swung ahead of me and made me feel as though I were following him. I'm sorry, he said. I strode on, sick and furious. Look, it probably won't be that bad for you. Tigatoy likes you. She'll be careful. I turned back towards the house, almost running from him. Has she done it to you yet? He asked, keeping up easily. I mean, you're about the right age for implantation. Has she? So implantation means for her to put her eggs inside of his body. I hit him. I didn't know I was going to do it, but I think I meant to kill him. If he hadn't been bigger and stronger, I think I would have. He tried to hold me off, but in the end had to defend himself. He only hit me a couple of times, and that was plenty. I don't remember going down, but when I came to, he was gone. It was worth the pain to get rid of him. I got up and walked slowly towards the house. The back door was dark. No one was in the kitchen. My mother and sisters were sleeping in their bedrooms, or pretending to. Once I was in the kitchen, I could hear voices. Tillich and Taryn from the next room. I couldn't make out what they were saying, didn't want to make it out. I sat down at my mother's table, waiting for quiet. The table was smooth and worn and heavy and well crafted. My father had made it for her just before he died. I remember hanging around underfoot when he built it. He didn't mind. Now I sat leaning on it, missing him. I could have talked to him. He had done it 3 times in his long life, 3 clutches of eggs, 3 times being opened up and sewed up. So a clutch, I'm guessing it's a count noun, kind of like dozen eggs or a flurry of unicorn a pride of lions, a clutch of eggs, or a litter of cats? How had he done it? How did anyone do it? I got up, took the rifle from my hiding place, and sat down again with it. It needed cleaning, oiling. All I did was load it. Gan? She made a lot of little clicking sounds when she walked on bare floor, each limb clicking in succession as it touched down, waves of little clicks. So succession means one right after the other. So that gives you the impression of those waves of little clicks. She came to the table, raised the front half of her body above it, and surged onto it. Sometimes she moved so smoothly she seemed to flow like water itself. She coiled herself into a small hill in the middle of the table and looked at me. "That was bad," she said softly. "You should not have seen it. It need not be that way." "I know." "Ti kotkif te, ch kotkif now." She will die of her disease. She will not live to raise her children, but her sister will provide for them and for Bran Lomas. Sterile sister, one fertile female in every lot, one to keep the family going. The sister owed Lomas more than she could ever repay. "He'll live now?" "Yes." "I wonder if he would do it again." "No one would ask him to do that again." I looked into the yellow eyes, wondering how much I saw and understood there, and how much I imagined. "No one ever asks us," I said. "You never asked me." She moved her head slightly. "What's the matter with your face?" Nothing important." Human eyes probably wouldn't have noticed the swelling in the darkness. The only light was from one of the moons shining through the window across the room. "Did you use the rifle to shoot the Octi?" "Yes." "And do you mean to use it to shoot me?" I stared at her, outlined in the moonlight, coiled, graceful body. "What does Terran blood taste like to you?" She said nothing. "What are you?" I whispered. "What are we to you?" She lay still, rested her head on her topmost coil. "You know me as no other does," she said softly. "You must decide." "That's what happened to my face," I told her. "What?" He goaded me into deciding to do something. So to goad means to pressure or to provoke someone. It didn't turn out very well. I moved the gun slightly, brought the barrel up diagonally under my own chin. At least it was a decision I made. As this will be. Ask me, Gatoy. For my children's lives? She would say something like that. She knew how to manipulate people, Terran and Tillich, but not this time. "I don't want to be a host animal," I said. "Not even yours." It took her a long time to answer. "We use almost no host animals these days," she said. "You know that." "You owe us." "We do. We wait long years for you and teach you and join our families to yours." She moved restlessly. "You know you aren't animals to us." I stared at her, saying nothing. "The animals we once used began killing most of our eggs after implantation long before your ancestors arrived," she said softly. "You know these things, Gan. Because your people arrived, we're relearning what it means to be a healthy, thriving people. And your ancestors, fleeing from their homeworld, from their own kind, who would have killed or enslaved them, they survived because of us. We saw them as people and gave them the preserve when they still tried to kill us as worms." At the word worms, I jumped. I couldn't help it, and she couldn't help noticing it. "I see," she said quietly. "Would you rather die than bear my young, Gan?" I didn't answer. "Shall I go to Xuan Hoa?" "Yes." Hoa wanted it. Let her have it. She hadn't had to watch Lomas. She'd be proud, not terrified. Tigatoy flowed off the table onto the floor, startling me almost too much. "I'll sleep in Hoa's room tonight," she said, "and sometime tonight or in the morning, I'll tell her." This was going too fast. My sister, Hoa, had had almost as much to do with raising me as my mother. I was still close to her, not like Ki. She couldn't want Tigatoy and still love me. Wait, Gatoy. She looked back, then raised nearly half her length off the floor and turned to face me. These are adult things, Gan. This is my life, my family. But she's my sister. I have done what you demanded. I have asked you. But it'll be easier with Hoa. She's always expected to carry other lives inside her. Human lives, human young, who should someday drink at her breast, not her veins. I shook my head. Don't do it to her, Gatoy. I was not Ki. It seemed I could become him, though, with no effort at all. I could make Xuan Hoa my shield. Would it be easier to know that red worms were growing in her flesh instead of mine? Don't do it to Hoa, I repeated. She stared at me, utterly still. I looked away, then back at her. Do it to me. I lowered my gun from my throat, and she leaned forward to take it. No, I told her. It's the law, she said. Leave it for the family. One of them might use it to save my life someday. She grasped the rifle barrel, but I wouldn't let go. I was pulled into a standing position over her. Leave it here, I repeated. If we're not animals, if these are adult things, accept the risk. This is risk, Gatoy, in dealing with a partner. It was clearly hard for her to let go of the rifle. A shudder went through her, and she made a hissing sound of distress. It occurred to me that she was afraid. She was old enough to have seen what guns could do to people. Now her young and this gun would be together in the same house, and she did not know about the other guns. In this dispute, they did not matter. I will implant the first egg tonight, she said as I put the gun away. Do you hear me, Gan? Why else had I been given a whole egg to eat while the rest of the family was left to share one? Why else had my mother kept looking at me as though I were going away from her, going where she could not follow? Did Tigatoy imagine I hadn't known? I hear. Now. I let her push me out of the kitchen, then walked ahead of her towards my bedroom. The sudden urgency in her voice sounded real. You would have done it to Hoa tonight, I accused. I must do it to someone tonight. I stopped in spite of her urgency and stood in her way. Don't you care who? She flowed around me and into my bedroom. I found her waiting on the couch we shared. There was nothing in Hoa's room that she could have used. She would have done it to Hoa on the floor. The thought of her doing it to Hoa at all disturbed me in a different way, and I was suddenly angry. Yet I undressed and lay down beside her. I knew what to do, what to expect. I'd been told all my life. I felt the familiar sting, narcotic, mildly pleasant, then the blind probing of her ovipositor. So ovipositor, it's a compound word. OVI is probably coming from the Latin stem of ovum, like related to eggs, and then positor, like a depositor. So to place something somewhere, ovipositor. The puncture was painless, easy, so easy going in. She undulated slowly against me, her muscles forcing the egg from her body into mine. So to undulate. Undulate means to move with a smooth up and down motion. Her muscles forcing the eggs from her body into mine. I held onto a pair of her limbs until I remembered Lomas holding her that way. Then I let go, moved inadvertently, and hurt her. So inadvertently means on accident. She gave a low cry of pain, and I expected to be caged at once within her limbs. When I wasn't, I held on to her again, feeling oddly ashamed. I'm sorry, I whispered. She rubbed my shoulders with 4 of her limbs. Do you care? I asked. Do you care that it's me? She did not answer for some time. Finally, you were the one making the choices tonight, Gan. I made mine long ago. Would you have gone to Hoa? Yes. How can I put my children into the care of one who hates them? It wasn't hate. I know what it was. I was afraid. Silence. I still am. I could admit it to her here, now. But you came to me to save Hoa. Yes. I leaned my forehead against her. She was cool velvet, deceptively soft. And to keep you for myself, I said. It was so. I didn't understand it, but it was so. She made a soft hum of contentment. I couldn't believe I'd made such a mistake with you, she said. I chose you. I believed you had grown to choose me. I had, but... Lomas. Yes. I'd never known a Terran to see a birth and take it well. Key has seen one, hasn't he? Yes. Terrans should be protected from seeing. I didn't like the sound of that, and I doubted that it was possible. Not protected, I said. Shown. Shown when we're young kids, and shown more than once. Katoy, no Terran ever sees a birth that goes right. All we see is Intilic, pain and terror and maybe death. She looked down at me. It is a primitive thing. It has always been a primitive thing. Her tone kept me from insisting. That and the knowledge that if she changed her mind, I might be the first public example. But I had implanted the thought in her mind. Chances were it would grow, and eventually she would experiment. You won't see it again, she said. I don't want you thinking any more about shooting me. A small amount of fluid that came into me with her egg relaxed me as completely as a sterile egg would have, so that I could remember the rifle in my hand and my feelings of fear and revulsion and anger and despair. So revulsion is kind of disgust, so much disgust that you want nothing to do with something. I could remember the feelings without reviving them. I could talk about them. I wouldn't have shot you, I said. Not you. She had been taken from my father's flesh when he was my age. You could have, she insisted. Not you. She stood between us and her own people, protecting, interweaving. So to interweave is to connect two things together. Kind of like if you think of a woven fabric, that means it's fabric where lots of pieces of yarn or string are connected. Would you have destroyed yourself? I moved carefully, uncomfortably. I could have done that. I nearly did. That's Key's away. I wonder if he knows. What? I did not answer. You will live now. Yes. Take care of her, my mother used to say. Yes. I'm healthy and young, she said. I won't leave you as Lomas was left. Alone, Intilic. I'll take care of you. Okay, that was a crazy story. My students are usually really shocked, a little bit revolted after reading that story. So let's start with the author's intent before we get into some of the literary theories. Octavia Butler called this her pregnant man story. She said it's a story about what might happen if a man got pregnant. So that just lends itself to looking at the story from a gender and feminist perspective, since biological females are the only ones who can get pregnant for humans. And but in this story, men get pregnant because of this interspecies symbiosis. Now, she has said that this is not a story about slavery, that it's a story about what would happen when the rent comes due. That is, what happens when maybe humans are no longer the apex species and we're living in an environment where we have to make concessions in order to live and survive and to thrive. She also said very specifically that she wrote this story because she was working through some worry, some trauma about a parasitic fly from South America called the bot fly. She was going on a trip to South America, I believe, and she was feeling pretty anxious about it because the bot fly, it lays eggs that go into usually cattle, but it can also go into people. So any mammal, usually larger mammals, and the grubs of those flies burrow in until they like emerge. And it's actually a pretty big issue in Brazil. It causes lots of damage to their leather industry because the skin of cows is damaged pretty badly because of that. In addition to the fact that it's just probably not on anybody's bucket list, even if you are an animal, to have that happen to you. So let's look at those three things. So the first thing is that pregnant man story. In this story, it's only through interspecies or intergalactic interactions that humans and the Tilic even meet each other in this imagined world where humans are no longer the apex species. So we're no longer making all the decisions about environmental management, about our future, our existence as humans. All of a sudden, there are these aliens that are making those decisions and telling us, informing us about those decisions. And so as a result of that, all of a sudden, human males have become the preferred or the go-to group for the aliens to reproduce, because women get pregnant with human babies. So they decide to use the human men to incubate their grubs. So right there, the idea that like men are being willingly or maybe through societal pressure becoming the host for the young of an alien species. It's a clear reversal of the gender roles that exist in human society, where it wasn't until 50, 60 years ago that women had any choice in whether or not we got pregnant, right? It was the pill and also condoms, birth control, better birth control gave women the control over managing our reproduction. And in the story, Gan, in a way, he's somewhat in control of managing whether or not he is impregnated or implanted with Tigatoi's eggs. But really what it comes down to is a biological condition. Gan and Tigatoi both have to, Tigatoi has to be biologically ready to implant the eggs into Gan. And then Gan, once he's old enough and he's fat enough, he's big enough to carry those eggs successfully, she's then able to implant. She mentions in the story that it had to be tonight or but you don't know when. Maybe she has to await some other cycle. It could be a month, a year. Who knows what the reproduction cycle is like for the Tilic. But for her to be able to reproduce at all is a miracle in and of itself. In the story, they mention that there's only one fertile female for every batch of eggs. So she happened to be the fertile female. She's responsible for carrying on her family line. And because she has to implant the eggs into another animal, in a sense, and she's not carrying the eggs herself, that almost reverses the roles and makes her more like a human man, in that she puts the young into another creature. And then, it's just her word that she's going to take care of Gan. That is his commitment that she's actually going to make sure that she gets all of the grubs out, that she returns his love, because there's this complicated scene where he's thinking about having her implant the eggs into her sister, into possibly her brother. But when it comes down to it, because he doesn't want her to implant the eggs into someone else, because he cares about her, he loves her, he says that he wants her to implant it into him because he wants to feel that closeness with her, something that he's been in many ways groomed to accept and to think is true. And also putting the grooming aside, that's just inherent in that culture. There's also the fact that their families have been bonded, connected for generations. His dad carried Tigatoi as a grub, and now he's going to carry Tigatoi's children. So you can see in the conversation that they're having at the end of the story that it's not really clear whether Tigatoi loves Gan or if it's just about convenience. I mean, there are some hints that she cares for him, and especially that she's going to care for him because he's carrying her children. But there is an upper hand that she has in that he's a habitant of a reserve, so he can't run away. Based on the laws of their culture, his family has to give one of their children so that the child can be a host for the Tilic eggs. So it's an interesting role reversal because it's often women who, or at least in a lot of literature, a lot of stories, it's females who are, wondering if a guy loves them or not and wants someone to show a grand gesture of love. And in this situation, it's Gan, a boy who is really seeking that love and validation and seeking that Tigatoy show him that she has chosen him as much as he is choosing her by allowing her to implant her eggs, even though the process of the eggs, the grubs growing and being removed is quite traumatic and dangerous. And he's trusting her with literally his life. It makes you also think about consent, which is something that comes up, when you're thinking about the interactions between males and females, consent, how much of Gan agreeing to do this is actually Gan wanting to do it, and how much of it is the fact that his society expects it, the fact that he's been groomed. There definitely is some evidence that he loves Tigatoy, but is love enough? If he were to say no and she implanted it into his sister, she is very powerful. She's the administrator of the preserve, so odds are that she's not going to get in trouble. No one is going to punish her for what she's done. There's also the power reversal that comes with Gan not knowing as much as Tigatoy knows. Tigatoy is not only twice as old as him, possibly a lot more. She's older than his mother. She is privy to the politics and the workings of her culture, a culture that is more powerful and possibly smarter than the humans. And Gan is a boy who just recently came of age. He's maybe 17, maybe a little bit older, somewhere around there. And what he knows is what she's shown him. So is it abuse of power that she's still putting him in this situation, or does she just see it? Does she see him as a pet? It's very much not clear. But what is clear is that Gan was implanted with the eggs. He chose to do it. And then after he chose to do it, you have this really tender moment, which some people might call disgusting as well, but the moment where she's implanted the eggs in him, and he hurts her a little bit, but she doesn't get mad at him. And so you can see that she's trying to be tender and thoughtful and considerate of his feelings and his fear. And then she ends by saying that she's going to take care of him, that she's young enough to make sure that he's taken care of and that nothing bad happens to him. It parallels some of those scenes where two people are being intimate. And it's not just about the act of intimacy, it's also about that moment afterwards where they're in that glow of love. Sometimes in some movies, you'll see cigarette smoke and they're just relaxed and they're like confessing their feelings for each other, or maybe they're connecting in a physical way. They're physically being intimate. And that's kind of like what that scene at the end of the story is. Him bringing his fear and being vulnerable and telling her what he thinks, and her reassuring him that he's taken care of and that she's going to be there for him. Now, in terms of symbiosis, that is another point that Octavia Butler mentioned. She said very specifically that this story is not about slavery, which is interesting because there's so many elements in the story that seem like they are non-consensual, definitely not humans making all of the decisions, which is a sign that in this world, humans are not the apex species. It's a sign of interspecies relations, I guess. That's something that many stories don't always delve into. Only a certain kind of sci-fi looks at the ways that humans and non-humans interact in a complex way, that is. Now, sci-fi can fall into lots of different categories, especially when you have aliens or non-humans that are from a different planet. You have the sci-fi aliens that are like animal aliens, like The Day After Tomorrow, where the aliens are just thoughtless animals and they're controlled by one central whatever, right? And so they're animals. Or even Independence Day, they're like animal aliens. They're wild, they're savage. And then you have other sci-fi that completely disregards aliens at all, like Battlestar Galactica in a way. So you have the Cylons that are like humans, but then they're robots, but they don't have non-human species. Every planet they go to is a different place, a variation of Earth, with birds, with the same animals we have here. And then you have some sci-fi where they look at intelligent species from other planets, and those species are almost always humanoid, more or less. They have a head, they have arms, they have generally our same physiology. They just look a little bit different. And in that kind of sci-fi, it's usually more nuanced. There are good aliens and there are bad aliens. The aliens have complex desires and motivations. The aliens are like humans and they're given that same human quality as humans, the good and the bad, but it's nuanced. In those sci-fi movies where humans and humanoid aliens interact, there's often much more depth, intelligence, and nuance in those interactions. And there's still a tendency to humanize the good aliens and to animalize the bad aliens, if you know what I mean. The bad aliens are brutal and they look bad and they are more like animals. The good aliens are human and kind and compassionate. This story flips that around. Now, this is one of the few stories where the aliens aren't necessarily projected or described as being incredibly bad, but the humans and the aliens still have a symbiotic relationship, and there are hints that the aliens are trying to grow, that they're evolving. Like where Tigatoy mentions that humans coming to the planet has helped her species become better. She says, "Because your people arrived, we are relearning what it means to be a healthy, thriving people. And your ancestors fleeing from their homeworld, from their own kind, who would have killed or enslaved them, they survived because of us. We saw them as people and gave them the preserve when they still tried to kill us as worms." Based on this, you can assume that the Tillich, that they are intelligent, that they're thoughtful, that they have some amount of compassion towards animals, but they're also a different condition of life on that planet. On that planet, the creatures, the living creatures there, reproduce by implanting their seeds into another animal, and that animal grows. And so part of what happened to this species, the Tillich, is the animals on their own planet have evolved a protection mechanism, so they don't grow the grubs in them as well anymore. And as a result, the Tillich have to figure out another way of reproducing, which reproduction is one of the most basic, fundamental things that a species has to do and has to get right. Otherwise, the species ceases to exist. So for the Tillich, they have a lot invested in making their natural resource, which is humans, continue and thrive, because in order for them to be able to live and thrive as a species, humans need to live and thrive as well. And so there is some investment there in kind of the mutual situation of the two species. This also hints at a cultural maturity. Like if you think about us humans, we kill and enslave animals. Something like 70% of the animals on planet Earth are in our food system, not running out in the wild. We literally are growing them to eat them. Whereas the tilic, it's not clear if there are humans that are outside of the preserve or not, but it seems to me like the preserve is a way of managing the resource that is humans in a way that's healthy for the tilic and also hopefully for the humans as well, because the compromise that either the tilic or the humans have come to is that only one human is going to be used in any human family. So it's based on family. So again, it's based on kind of family units rather than just a random person volunteering, which if someone random were going to volunteer, I mean, what would they have to do to get you to volunteer to host someone's eggs? Like, I don't know. It's an interesting question, but there's a hint at symbiosis, of figuring out a way to live well and do what Octavia Butler said, what happens when the rent comes due? Well, I guess when the rent comes due, you figure out a workaround, and they figured out a workaround here. And then the last point about the bot fly, that goes back to the humans and in a way symbiosis. I guess if you think of the bot fly and its relationship, this parasitic relationship with other animals, Octavia Butler has written a story that is less parasitic, and that's more about coexistence. And the coexistence, in some ways, the humans are groomed or primed in order to agree to this situation, especially since they're being taken very, very young, because maybe the human elders, in recognizing that this isn't going to be a comfortable, ideal situation for any human, think, okay, well, the younger they are, the easier it will be for them to accept this situation. Looking at the elements of this story that are related to afrofuturism, or specifically the African American experience in the United States, I see that in this story, there's very little mention of skin color. It's mainly just about human versus tilic. We don't know if Gan, his mom, his dad, whether they are black, white, what race they might be. But there is a mention of one of the N-tilic, Bramlomus, being brown, having brown skin. But I mean, it's not clear if he's a tanned white person or if he's black or Indian, whatever he is, right? Something that comes to mind is post-colonial theory, specifically as it relates to the African American experience, because most colonies around the world, there were native people, and then outside people came in and enforced some kind of order or system or structure on those people. And then once colonialism ended, those people were left with something, and that group of people went back to wherever they came from. They figured out a new order based on what they had experienced. But the situation of the Terrans on this other planet more closely resembles the situation of African Americans, I think. And here's why. The Terrans on that other planet, from what I can read or infer, they're a minority on this planet of mainly tilics and native indigenous tilic species, the species native to that planet. These humans live on a preserve, and living on a preserve, which you could even call it a ghetto, it is not a place they choose to live necessarily. They're told to live there. They're forced to live there. And so they have a majority that they're surrounded by dictating the conditions of their life in many ways. And they do have some input into how they live, but it's not clear how much. And it's not clear whether or not they have agreed to what is decided, or if they even participated in creating this social order that they're participating in. And I thought about this in terms of the post-slavery United States, Reconstruction, the Reconstruction period right after slavery, when, the United States was trying to integrate the newly freed slaves into society, and all of the laws that were passed, the decisions that were passed. And if I look at that period after slavery and look at the conditions of what's happening on the preserve, I can see some parallels in terms of, the Tillich saying, or Gan mentioning that humans used to be bred, they used to be just put together, and they were just fed eggs so that they would reproduce, and they were treated like animals. And then at some point, the humans they wouldn't have survived. Something happened. It sounds like the humans had revolted and were fighting back. And as a result, the Tillich society decided that they needed to make some changes. And so their change was this compromise that included creating a space for humans to thrive, which was the preserve, and also creating these rules for how they're going to select humans. So not all humans are chosen, not even the humans they would prefer, which is females. They choose the males. So then the females can reproduce and the males can carry their eggs. And I think, okay, so that part is speculative fiction. It's definitely an imagined situation. But what's not necessarily speculative about it is, if you take the situation of the newly freed African Americans, the freedmen in the South, and the migrations and being told where they could live and the laws that regulated the actions and movements of newly freed people. And I think, there's some parallels there. Let's look at the reading through the lens of afropessimism. Afropessimism is a way of thinking that examines how racism, colonialism, and the history of slavery, especially the transatlantic slave trade, continue to shape society today. It focuses on how these systems affect not only social structures and institutions, but also everyday lives, identity, and the physical experiences of Black people. Examples of social structures are the legal and justice system, economic system, media and cultural institutions, family and social norms, and of course, the education system. Octavia Butler's Bloodchild can be read through an Afro-pessimist framework as a story that shows that domination, bodily vulnerability, and survival are inescapable. Liberation and symbiosis are not the focus of the story when read through an Afro-pessimist lens. Afropessimism emphasizes structural captivity, which means it's in the structure of the Tillich society that humans are oppressed by things like, for example, the walls of the preserve, their lack of representation on governing bodies, being managed as a natural resource for Tillich reproduction, just to name a few examples. Through this lens, the story challenges the idea that humans and the Tillich live in a fair or cooperative relationship, and instead highlights a permanent imbalance of power, whereby the Tillich have control over humans as the structure of their social relationship. An Afro-pessimist reading also brings out the ways there's no future for humans outside the Tillich Terran system. The Terrans have been designated to carry the Tillich eggs because the native animals on the Tillich planet have adapted to kill the Tillich grub babies, thereby not carrying them very effectively. So the humans are the Tillich's best option for having children. And in this way, the story offers no real alternative, positive future for humans, only survival through the system of domination. There's no vision of escape, equality, or transformation. And this aligns with an Afro-pessimist framework in that the rejection of hopeful narratives that promise eventual justice or liberation is done away with. From an Afro-pessimist perspective, Gan's relationship with Tigatoy mirrors the condition of relational coercion. Affection and protection coexist with the absolute control over Black or racialized bodies, which in this story is the human body. Even though Tigatoy seems to care for Gan, she really controls his body and that of his family. Gan's body is not simply oppressed, it's fungible, valued primarily as a vessel for reproduction. Fungible is a legal term that means replaceable by another identical item or mutually interchangeable. So his body can be traded out for his sisters or really any other humans without the Tillich really even needing to give anything back. And what they do give back in affection is almost like they would give a pet, or how they treat a farm animal that they're attached to but willing to let go or pass away for their own use. Gan's choice to be implanted is not truly free because refusing would lead to physical violence and harm, the harm of carrying the egg. And that harm would shift to some other human body, a human belonging to his family. It isn't clear what might happen if all of his siblings were to refuse, but the idea is that one of them would be forced to carry the egg if they were to refuse. And this lack of real choice and bodily autonomy is the hallmark of illusion of choice under captivity when the story is read through an afropessimist lens. Importantly, Butler's story refuses narratives of resistance or emancipation. When Gan agrees to the implantation, he doesn't change the system or interrupt the system. He becomes fully part of it. The gun Tigatoy gives him doesn't represent real power, but limited control that's allowed only if he keeps the system in place. The gun is a concession to make him feel safe enough to continue participating in the way Tigatoy has chosen he should participate. Even the mental oppression of being groomed to think this is a good thing, carrying the Tillich eggs, represents a psychological prison for Gan because it goes against his natural urge to be disgusted and to reject being a host for the eggs, especially since hosting puts him in danger and carries absolutely no benefit beyond proximity to Tigatoy's power. An Afro-pessimist reading also brings out the ways dependency reinforces control. The humans in the story don't have a means for independence, and this reinforces the Tillich's control. All humans, especially Gan's family, rely on Tigatoy for protection from the hostile Tillich because she oversees the preserve, and she's created a system that gives humans a bit more control than the previous system. Thus, her prerogatives guarantee their comfortable survival on the planet. This dependence appears mutual, but in reality, it strengthens Tigatoy's power. Afro-pessimistically, care becomes another tool of control rather than a path to equality. And notice how Tigatoy seems to see this as completely natural for the humans to be dependent on her. It's only a veneer of choice whose body is implanted, Gan's or his sister's. Gan and the family don't have the right or even a path to refuse this dangerous implantation altogether. They have to participate in some way. Another point that stands out in an Afro-pessimist reading of the story is how the story normalizes violence as acceptable because the people in power, the Tillich, are not the people who are the victims of the violence. It's the humans/Terrans who are the victims of the reproductive violence. The humans accept implantation as normal, even though it's dangerous and traumatic, and this reflects how structural domination becomes routine and normalized, which is a key idea in Afro-pessimism. The way their society functions makes it seem natural for them to do something dangerous, in this case, carry the Tillich egg. From an Afro-pessimist perspective, violence doesn't need to be constant. It only needs to be an unavoidable consequence of living in a racialized body, and in this case, a human body. There's a related point. An Afro-pessimist analysis highlights bodily extraction or using the less privileged group as a biological resource, where life is sustained by consuming another group's body. The way Gan's family have been carrier animals for Tigatoy's family, and the way all humans in the story are used to incubate the Tillich eggs, illustrates how the less powerful group is seen for their contribution as a resource, not for their inherent value as equal people. Gan is valued less as a person and more as a biological resource, and you see this when he's holding the gun and refusing to allow Tigatoy to implant grubs in him. Her loving disposition changes. While earlier she's acting like she's just part of his family, she suddenly sees Gan as a barrier to her own intended use for him, which is to implant her eggs and to have children. She says something again like, "I thought you had come to choose me," which could be gaslighting, or it could just be a function of her being so much older than he is, or a recognition of his limited agency to actually choose not to be implanted himself. Regardless, the system is set up for the Terrans to do some amount of dangerous unpaid work in carrying the eggs, and the only benefit they get is that none of their other siblings have to carry the egg, since they have carried the egg. Some would call this exploitation, telling another group that just because of who they are, they have to do a dangerous job that doesn't benefit them in any way and only benefits the group in power. Afropessimism would look at this from the perspective of the white-black relations in the US, and in the context of the story, it's the Tillich-Terran relations. Overall, this afro-pessimist reading presents domination as deeply rooted, personal, and ongoing, not something that belongs only to the past or can be easily resolved. I think we actually have an incredibly optimistic future, but I do think that learning from these stories that we read, this story specifically, even though it's an imaginary story, but learning the lessons that we can learn about environmental stewardship, living in harmony with other species. I mean, this is a non-human species on another planet, but maybe one day we'll meet people from other planets or something. I mean, we have a very bright future ahead of us. And Bloodchild, even though it's a really peculiar and bizarre story, it's definitely not a situation that most people want to be in, is to be a host for these creatures, these Tilic. It still gives us a glimpse of what future might be in store for humans, specifically lessons that we can learn about being more thoughtful to the environment, to each other, creating more interspecies positive relationships that don't involve systems of hierarchy and dominance in quite the same way. And I guess world building, because you have the Tilic, the Intilic in their culture. Something that stood out to me that was interesting is that the prefix at the beginning of their name changes, whether they have children or they don't have children. So it goes from T to CH once they have children. So that's a hint at the importance of family in that culture. And we're now discovering that animals have language of their own. Whales have language. Mice have language. So, gosh, there's a lot of good things in store for us as humans in terms of being able to communicate with other species. And hopefully when we get to that point where we can, speak whale or speak dolphin, hopefully we are thoughtful in how we interact with them. And we try to see them as equal and not as creatures to experiment on. Voilà, c'est ça.